On the search to find out more about my family history and why I never got to meet my real grandfather and why my mother never had a father, I wanted to find more about my grandfather. And so on further investigation, I knew that he was in World War II. But you see, for most of us civilians, we don't really think about what these men did in World War II. So when he came back from the war, by the way, there's ads, and it's very disrespectful because this is a veteran. Thanks a lot, Find a Grave, because you want to make money off of Peter Thomas DeSico Jr., my grandfather. So we're going to try to X out of this if we can. And no, Google wants to make money. But back to what I was saying. Most of us, we didn't think about it, especially when I was a kid. Now, I was a kid that grew up in the 70s and 80s. These war veterans, these brave war veterans, were all around us. And they had parades for them on Veterans Day. And we just didn't think to ask them very much questions about what they went through in World War II. We knew that they were brave, but we just never asked them. And it was actually a thing when we were children that our parents would tell us, don't talk to them about it. It's none of your business. It was pretty much be quiet. And so you would see lots of these veterans walking around, especially in New York City, where I grew up in, with their hats, their veteran hats. And we were told that it was rude to ask adults questions about why they were wearing that hat. So we would all be quiet, and we really didn't think much, except for sometimes your parents would put on something called PBS, which before cable, it was BC, get it? Before cable. You just like on, I don't know, Sunday, there was never anything on TV. So you would watch PBS with your parents. And well, not my mother, because she liked to sleep in late. And my dad would be watching Hitler, shouting and screaming with spittle flying out of his mouth, doing his angry speeches, and people raising their arms and screaming Heil Hitler. And I said, who is that? And my dad said, the devil. Now, I didn't know anything about what I was watching. And you'd see them do little videos about World War II, where you actually saw footage of battles as a narrator explain to you what was going on. But when I was listening, well, or so I thought I was listening, I thought I was understanding everything they were talking about, but I really wasn't. I must have had ADHD. But back to my grandfather. I never got to meet him. He died in 1970, and let's get a picture up. By the way, thank you, Frank W. on findagrave.com for taking a photograph of my brave grandfather's grave. Okay, so I never got to meet him because he died in 1970 at the age of 45 from stomach cancer, I was told. Now, I was also told that my mother was kept away from her father, and so was her younger brother. My grandmother had children with other people as well. Pretty mixed up family, if you know what I mean. And she threw him out of the house and divorced him when my mother was 1 year old. And I asked why. And my mother didn't know why. And she said, my mother just told me not to go near him. Apparently, he never really left his apartment. He died in his apartment filled with books. On my mother's 18th birthday, she went to see her father for the first time. And his apartment, she remembered, was filled and surrounded with thousands of books. And she didn't say anything else except for he was really nice and I really liked him. And not long after that, he died. He died of so-called stomach cancer. But what I also heard was that he was an alcoholic. And now after reading about his life, I can understand why he was an alcoholic. You see, these men were discarded. A lot of these men would come back from war. And let's try to see if we can get more pictures. They would come back from war and let's go ahead. This is his tombstone. Peter Thomas DeSico, New York. 143rd Infantry, World War II. He was in the 143rd 36th Division, and he was in Company K. And he also fought with the 3rd Battalion in France, okay? This was one of the first Americans to land in Europe. Now, I was wondering, well, what was wrong with him? Why would someone die at 45 from stomach cancer? Well, apparently, this man must have seen the most bloodiest of battles fighting hundreds of days nonstop for the liberty of Europe and keeping Americans from being invaded by the Nazis. And so these men were discarded. They came back after seeing the horrors of hell with PTSD. And that's what I think went on here. Now, I have PTSD. Well, I'm not a battle-worn soldier, but I have PTSD from multiple traumatic instances in my life where I have flashbacks, I can't sleep, I have panic attacks, I see visions inside my head of repeats of what had happened, and it's very, very painful and very hard to live with this. So I can only imagine what a soldier's PTSD must be like, or must have been like. So here he is. Now, it says here, his birthday, July 27th, 1925. They even put the wrong birthday date on my own grandfather's grave because it was July 22nd. I called up Long Island National Cemetery and they told me there's nothing that can be done about it unless I prove that he was my grandfather and prove that his birth certificate, I don't have that. His war records, I don't have that because in 1970 when he passed away, all his belongings were thrown into the garbage and nobody attended this man's funeral where you see this here tombstone. BSM, Bronze Star Medal. PH, Purple Heart. What really happened to Peter? Well, we're going to find out. Okay, so thank you to a Frenchman. Yes, a Frenchman, a man from France. He actually loves Company K. Why does he love Company K? My grandfather's, group or company. He loves them because they actually liberated his town of, I'm going to probably pronounce it wrong, Grenoble, France, in 1944. And his whole entire town was liberated from the Nazis. And so he dedicates his life to actually helping people find out about their American soldier relatives and what they've done in the war. And he has access to records. So here his Facebook page, 143rd Infantry Regiment Book Project. And we had some conversations back and forth. Thank you so much for your message on my post about the Rapido River crossing, which, by the way, was a bloody, bloody undertaking that my grandfather was involved in. Okay, I searched for your grandfather's service on my records. Here is what I found. Now, he got the ball rolling because I'm getting very tired of companies such as Ancestry.com, Fold3, 23andMe, buying up all the information of our relatives and making it so that you cannot access your own family's personal records, which actually was at one time free to search on the internet. Now they're making it $99 a year. To what? Find out about my own family member I have to pay? Well, I did do a DNA test. They got money out of me that way. Oh, but there's more. You have to continue to pay them and create some kind of membership program in order to get information about them. Really, really, really greedy. Okay. I searched for your grandfather's service on my records, and this gentleman saved me $99 a year from Ancestry.com. God bless you, Matthias. Okay. He joined Company K on March 20th, 1944. By the way, he was there before 1944. On his 18th birthday, he signed a draft card and was drafted. He joined it on March 20th, 1944 as a private. He was promoted to private first class on May 1st, 1944. On August 29th, the fateful day. And when I say fateful day, it's a sad day for him. Okay. And I'm going to pronounce this wrong, to all you French people out there, I apologize. By the way, I have Southern French blood in my system. I did a DNA test. I found out that I'm Basque, and that is actually the southernmost part of Spain meets the border of the northernmost part of Spain. Okay, and my relatives went from the south of France and moved down from the 1600s to the 1700s to the north of Spain. They were fleeing something. Maybe the French Revolution. Okay. On August 29, 1944, near Montélimar, France, 1 hour from his hometown in Grenoble, he was wounded by a gunshot wound on his right wrist and then transferred to the 23rd General Hospital. His MOS code, or military operations specialty, was 746, which means he was a bar gunner. Okay, so what really excites me is my grandfather wasn't just carrying around any old rifle. And I have a World War II, well, it's not functional, a World War II rifle that they carried around. It was clunky. It was heavy. It was probably not the best weapon to send these men into war with, but he was a bar gunner. What the heck does that stand for? Okay, so a bar stands for Browning automatic rifle. It was some sort of machine gun with a tripod. And I'll try to add a photo on here after the video is done when I edit. And so here is a bar gunner or a machine gunner. Quite cool. All right, so I love hearing that. Okay. I guess he was then transferred to another unit and came back to the U.S. I don't have more information. Oops, I did not try to draw on that on purpose. More information's on the company daily reports. Okay, so I found it. Yes, I did. How did I do it? I tricked Ancestry.com. Well, I didn't really trick them. My daughter did. My daughter actually signed up for a free trial where you don't, and by the way, you know what you can do? They ask you for a credit card, right? For a free trial, 30-day trial. Add your credit card information here. You can cancel at any time. Well, I taught my daughter how to trick these MFs. I said, do you have one of those vanilla Visa gift cards that someone's given you in the past as a present for Christmas or your birthday? Yes, she said. Well, I have them too. I said, if it even has 50 cents on it, 75 cents, use that credit card and they'll let you in like Flynn. And we got in like Flynn. So we have 30 days to find out information before having to pay $99.99. Not doing it. Okay, so my grandfather was helped by this kind French historian from Grenoble, France, who is dedicated to researching the World War II American GIs from Company K, 143rd Infantry Regiment 36th, US Infantry Division Army. He helped me so much. And I posted on Facebook, my grandfather's military unit in World War II liberated his town, and he gave me info on what happened to him. This historian is named Matthias Riviere. Thank you so much, Matthias. But we get more information after this part that I'm going to have to add to Facebook. Okay, I never got to meet my grandfather, blah, blah, blah. I told you all about it. He was discarded because of PTSD, lived all by himself in a room full of books until he died. Okay, so my grandfather was in the very bloody Italian campaign in World War II, which was one bloody battle after another, which included, now not in the proper order, Africa, Salerno, the Battle of San Pietro, the Battle of the Rapido River. Google that. That one was a doozy. Anzio, Monte Cassino, Operation Dragoon. Okay, Operation Dragoon was something that Sir Winston Churchill, did not want to do. And they actually kept telling him, come on, let's do this. We have to invade Europe to get the Nazis from France, and he didn't agree with that and didn't like it, and so they dragooned him into doing it. It's an actual saying, yes, look it up. And these men came home a shell of what they once were, and nobody knew their burdens, so most of these brave men were discarded by their family and friends. I am so disgusted because the military put the wrong birth date on my grandfather's gravestone. His birthday was July 22nd, 1925, and they put the birth date as the 27th of July. And they told me it's a historical marker. You have to produce paperwork to prove that he's yours and that's his birthday. Yeah, and I can't do that. Okay, screw you, Long Island National Cemetery, for actually leaving, in my mind, a war hero's gravestone incorrectly engraved. Okay, So here we go. All his things were thrown in the garbage, his Bronze Star Medal and Purple Heart. Can you imagine that? He earned those things, thrown in the garbage. Okay, they won't even let me get copies of them because I have to prove that I'm the next of kin and the oldest alive. I don't have his birth certificate and his death certificate and his military papers, so they told me I can't get copies of his medals. Really nice. Thanks a lot, United States government. Okay, PFC Peter Thomas DeSico Jr. On Army records, he is also known as PFC, Peter, and they spell his name with a space in the middle of the DE and the Seco. By the way, my mom used to get made fun of when a kid. They'd call it DeChico. And she'd say, no, it's DeSico. All right. He served with Company K, 143rd Infantry Regiment, 36th Infantry Division. So this isn't going to be one of those interesting stints or documentaries that people do. Okay, so he was served with Company K, 143rd Infantry Regiment, 36th U.S. Infantry Division. Private First Class Peter Thomas DeSico from Brooklyn, New York, joined Company K on March 20th, 1944 as a private. He was promoted to PFC on May 1st, 1944. On August 29th, 1944, near Montélimar, France, 1 hour from Grenoble, France, he was wounded by a gunshot wound on his right wrist, then transferred to the 23rd General Hospital. His MOS code, military occupation specialty, was 746, and he used the Browning gunner machine gun, which he was a bar gunner. He received the Purple Heart, shot in the wrist, on August 29th, 1944, in Montélimar, France. Diagnosis, fracture. Compound, communicated with nerve involvement. He actually was shot with a bullet in his wrist. He had paralysis and nerve damage. I found out that after he got back from the war, this was the $1 million injury. He got sent right home. Okay? I found out he spent a year in a hospital in France. And they actually, he didn't come home until, almost a year. He didn't come home until sometime in 1945. And in 1946, married my grandmother. And in 1949, had my mother, his oldest child. Okay, so this man went through hell. He was discharged and retired for disability. But this disability followed him to the day of his death, which is very sad. Okay, here is Peter Thomas DeSico, if we can blow this up. And it won't let me do it sideways. Oh, son of a bee. Here we go. I found out more information after I wrote that post. Matthias, good old Matthias, God bless you in France. When Peter joined Company K, the company was located about 1 mile north of Valle, don't make fun of my French, Valle di Maddaloni, Italy. And by the way, my grandfather was Italian, 100% Italian, and he had to conquer his own people. Really interesting. Maddaloni, Italy. When he was promoted to Private First Class, Company K was about a half mile south of Farino, Italy. Company K was located approximately 4 miles northwest of Montélimar when he was wounded around the Pic de Chenavari, France. And I said that with an Italian accent. I think at the bottom of the mountain. Oh my God. Here's the link that will lead you to the 143rd Infantry Regiment answer action report. Open the one called 143rd Infantry Regiment AAR to September 1944, which, by the way, Ancestry.com hasn't purchased yet. Can you imagine this? You have to pay them to find out information about your loved ones. Really greedy. By the way, the Mormons bought out most of that stuff too. Thanks a lot, Mormons. All right. And take a look at pages starting from page 110. It explains better the battle during which Peter was wounded, which we're going to hear all the action. Stay tuned. Don't hit the back button. Why are you thinking you're going to hit the back button? Okay. Company K was part of the 3rd Battalion. I did not know that. And was to hold Magnanon. Now, I took Latin, magna, and Latin means great. So this word is a misnomer. Magnanon. Get it? Not great. Ridge. He was to hold Magnanon Ridge, overlooking Road 7, and, I'm going to butcher this one, La Coucourde. Okay, don't laugh. It does probably not sound like what it sounds like in real life. I believe this is the coordinates. He gave me the freaking coordinates where my grandfather was shot through the wrist. Okay, and I looked it up. It's a hilly area right next to the Rhone River and on a ledge. Okay, really dangerous place. Lots of trees and lots of hills. Okay, or the ones abreast. I think when Company K, their morning report was August 29th, the day he was shot through the wrist by the Germans, was made. The company was located 4 miles northwest of Montélimar near Pic de Chenavari, and then crossed the Rhone River to take the Magranon Ridge. And the rest of the battalion, I didn't draw on that, did I? By the way, the 3rd Battalion won a Presidential Unit Citation for the actions on Magranon Ridge. And I believe Peter was wounded during the Magranon Ridge battle. We're going to get down to this juicy information, boys and girls, for free before Ancestry buys it up. Or Fold 3 or 23andMe, those bastards. All right, so we're going to go into the Texas Military Forces Museum and go to page 110. Because I know most of you get bored because you're used to TikTok videos, we'll watch the Battle of San Pietro, which my grandfather was in, which was the Italian campaign, as I try to decipher what happened to the 143rd and the 3rd Battalion and the 36th Division, in Company K, where my grandfather was, in old records that are almost so faded that you can't even read them. All right, so here we go. I'm supposed to look for number 110. Okay, apparently, they were taking a lot of Germans prisoner, but it was quite the battle. All right, so here we go. It's very hard to read. So far, what I'm getting, they were trying to take the Magranon Ridge. Okay, the 3rd Battalion, which my grandfather was in, there was 3 battalions, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. He was in the 3rd. He was under the care of Major Andrews, who was the 3rd Battalion commanding officers. Okay, so each rifleman was instructed to at least use 1 M1 clip every hour, and each machine gunner to fire at least 1 belt every hour to deter any possible enemy break. Fire from cannon company, anti-tank company, 50 caliber machine guns, and small arms was all defective on Highway 7, wrecking vehicles, shooting troops off vehicles. I think it says effective. Yes, effective. And also, it says, it's very faded. They chased the enemy out of houses. Now, the 1st Battalion, my grandfather was in the 3rd. They all worked together on this. In the 143rd Infantry, by the way, which is out of Texas, and my grandfather was from Brooklyn, New York, but he was with the Texans, was sent up to Task Force Butler on the L'Oreal Road with the mission of mopping up the valley. Meanwhile, the 3rd Battalion, where my grandfather was in, was sent the 3rd Battalion sent bazooka teams to interrupt traffic on Highway 7 and units to mop up Magranon Ridge. Mop up, meaning to finish it up. Okay, wow, so he was probably covering fire for the bazooka teams, is what I'm thinking, because he had that machine gun. Okay, at 063 hours, the 15th and 30th Infantry Regiments of the 3rd Division, my grandfather, followed by the 7th Infantry, attacked Montélimar, and after its capture, advanced to 57 Northing. 16 aircraft, friendly, bombed and strafed to hit enemy ammunition trucks and to destroy other vehicles. Cannon Company, protected by Company E, continued to fire artillery missions from its position on, defilade, invading and destroying the following: 20 trucks, 1 IV Panther IV tank, I guess that's a German tank, 5 horse-drawn wagons, loaded with troops, 2 horse, it's very hard to read it, horse something picks, 25 bicycle troops, and casualties of personnel. For the same date, Observation Post Number 3 reported the following. Observed enemy casualties, 50 vehicles, 10 horse-drawn vehicles, 50 horses, 2 105mm artillery pieces, 200 personnel casualties. Observation Post Number 2 for the same period observed 4 enemy tanks knocked out. I can't read what this says. It's faded. At Marseille, 5 prisoners of war were taken from an FFI vehicle attempting to escape to the northeast. 4 were military police from the 338th Division who had been trailing the cars carrying the division staff of high-ranking officers and generals. These prisoners of war had previously been stationed at Arras, France, and on the 12th of August, 1944, had been ordered to move out. They believed the 757th Division to be far ahead of them, and they had to take the defensive positions, and were told the only way back over the hills to the east. They reported some 6 companies consisting of 60 to 80 men each were now in the hills, and the following day the 3rd Battalion, my grandfather, successfully stopped scattered units composed of 116 something battalion, Commander Battalion, the 28th Reserve Grenadier Regiment, the 108th Reserve, I can't read it, Division, I cannot read it, something, the vicinity of Clary, Clary, and they started to prepare to attack to the southwest, and the 3rd Battalion, hold on, we have to get to the 3rd Battalion, continued while friendly tanks and tank destroyers were sent south around Hill 294 up the valley. The 2nd Battalion forced its way back to the original position and fired down into the valley to knock out and leave exploding 5 German trucks. With the enemy engaged to the northeast slope of Hill 294, Company G, having reorganized, moved up from the south, and Company E came around the flank on the pocket of Germans caught in this pincher. Lieutenant Colonel Charles J. Denholm at this point reported to Colonel Adams that 1 tank and 1 artillery piece, both enemy, were atop Hill 430, looking down on the 143rd command post. Should our artillery attempt to fire on them in their present position, our own troops will be endangered. At this moment, the Germans began surrendering in large numbers. Observation Post Number 3 reported that the counterattack was over 0714 hours, and all was quiet, and the road was jammed by traffic from the bridge into the town with several vehicles on fire. 1 prisoner of war, a German first sergeant, reported that the German counterattack had not been organized, that all enemy troops were attempting to escape our trap, and that all enemy troops in the adjacent valley were ready to surrender. German officers, including Brigadier General Otto Richter, who's like our Patton, but even higher than General Patton, commanding general of the 198th Division, was taken prisoner. And the 3rd Battalion reported 600 prisoners of war, plus 100 artillery pieces, the latter being promptly destroyed. During the latter part of the battle, Cannon Company knocked out 19 vehicles, one Mark IV tank, and killed approximately 100 of the enemy. Almost no traffic now moving on Highway 7, where my grandfather was. The enemy had effected a bypass, and our artillery units were laying fire on that route. The only resistance now was scattered sniper fire, which was systematically neutralized. At 1100 hours, the 3rd Battalion, my grandfather, sighted 12 American infantrymen deployed, moving up the valley. My grandfather, a patrol was sent out to meet them and to warn them of sniper fire. Those approaching were identified as the unit of the 7th Infantry, 3rd Infantry Division, as the 143rd Infantry disengaged and began peeling off and moving back by companies to join Task Force Butler. 3 57mm guns, 3 1.5-ton trucks, 4 jeeps, and 1 trailer lost to the enemy the night before were recovered in serviceable condition. The 1st Battalion were awaiting orders in the vicinity of Loriol to attack south, reported the capture of 203 prisoners of war. All elements of the 143rd Infantry were now relieved by units of the 3rd Infantry Division, my grandfather, and proceeded in the vicinity of Loriol, the command post established on the outskirts, to fire on enemy movement, inflicting heavy and over-mounting casualties in equipment and personnel. In the early morning of 29th August 1944, the morning and day and evening, not sure which one, that my grandfather was shot in the wrist by a German. The 1st Battalion, Company B, 1 platoon, Company A, and 1 platoon, Company D, which continued to fight in the original sector, moved to join Task Force Butler in its assembly area. The remainder of the 143rd RCT moved to attack. The 2nd Battalion was to seize Hill 294, and the 3rd Battalion, my grandfather, was to mop up Magranon Ridge, in which the bazooka teams raided Highway 7. At first, the 3rd Battalion received no opposition on Magranon Ridge, and then all at once the enemy opened up with small arms fire as our troop moved up the slopes. The subsequent enemy action was as confused as it was violent. Enemy troops, tanks, vehicles, and horse-drawn wagon artillery moved towards La Coucourde between Hill 294 and the hill mass to its intermediate left. This enemy column collided head-on with the 2nd Battalion, 143rd Infantry, creating a disorganized firefight, and then swung over towards the 3rd Battalion, 143rd Infantry, my grandfather, to receive vicious fire from battalion and artillery weapons. As our units discovered the beginnings of enemy infiltration in large number in the valley, our artillery, cannon company, and all battalion weapons were brought to bear. The action was intense, vicious, and too close for the use of mortars. Enemy tanks penetrated within 200 yards of the 3rd Battalion CP, making possible their capture of the 3rd Battalion aid station and part of the heavy weapons platoon. One room of the house containing 3rd Battalion CP, or command post, was entered by 5 Germans, 3 of whom were killed and the remainder captured. Enemy tanks pushing down the valley, plus enemy fire from the 20mm anti-aircraft guns shooting overhead, and small arms forced the 2nd Battalion Headquarters Company and Company 2 to move back and take up defensive positions while Company G was scattered by the tank attacks. Observation post number 2 was forced to leave its position hurriedly as Germans were rapidly approaching that position. A burst of enemy machine gun fire was followed by 4 enemy flares in the following order at 1-minute intervals: green, red, white, and another white, as 10 American tanks moved south on the dirt road in front of the 2nd Battalion's position. More enemy white and green flares sent up in front of the advancing German troops. At this stage, some of the cannon company's M7 mounts were momentarily cut off from our troops, but were able to regain contact after a fierce firefight. Anti-tank company 143rd Infantry knocked out 3 enemy tanks, and one of our tank destroyers were quickly placed in position on the road to block enemy tank passage through the Candilac Pass. This day was the day of great victory, the day my grandfather was shot. On August 29, 1944, for the troops of the 143rd Infantry, it marked the completion of the destruction of a considerable portion of the German army in southern France. Thousands of vehicles observed destroyed, thousands of prisoners taken, with only a few broken remnants of the 2 enemy able to escape. The casualties for the day were killed in action 3, wounded in action 22. My grandfather was one of those wounded in action. Missing in action 3, and 1,243 prisoners of war captured during the day's action. As the regiment moved into assembly area in the vicinity of Chabrier, a roadblock was sent out and 2 combat patrols, each in platoon strength, were sent into Viance after dark, while the regiment again moved into division reserve. On the last day of August 29th, pursuit of the enemy continued with the 143rd RCT moving by motor shuttle towards Valenciennes to close at 2300 hours in the vicinity of Lentiol. 2 patrols were sent into the town of Beaupierre, and although no enemy contact was made, enemy mortar activity was heard moving north of the town. Intelligence reports stated that the 9th and the 11th Panzer Divisions, with attached units numbering approximately 20,000 Germans, were moving in the vicinity of Lyon with an unknown number of tanks, at least 1 battery of the 77 mm, 2 batteries of 105 millimeters, and 1 battery of 150 millimeter artillery. The main difficulty facing the 143rd RCT was the problem of supply and transportation, since the enemy was moving towards Germany so rapidly. It was difficult for our units to make contact. At the end of August, the 143rd RCT was relentlessly pursuing the enemy to the northeast. Signed, Douglas N. Boyd, Captain, 143rd Infantry Adjutant. Holy cow. Okay, they were actually cited for a presidential meritorious, like, yeah, what do you call it? I'm just like, I can't believe they captured 1,243 prisoners of war, German prisoners of war, on one day. That is absolutely insane. Okay, so here's the conclusions of the regimental commander. Number 1, the operations during the period of the 15th to the 31st of August 1944 was so varied and occurred with such tremendous speed that one who is actively engaged recalls them as separate events with difficulty. The most impressive thoughts that have occurred to me are comparisons of methods to be employed in a pursuit designed to destroy an enemy. 2 general methods have been employed: A, entrapment; B, direct pursuit, a foot race. The entrapment of the enemy forces of size must be planned and executed on a grand scale, with a division pushing while another encircles. This is flanking. This is actually what I call kettling, like what the police do to protesters. It completely surrounds them. The encircling unit being the one to deliver the most destructive blows. Large units are required because large areas must be covered to entrap large enemy formations, and large units must be used to provide the strength to absolutely stop the enemy's withdrawal, which is the first step towards softening the enemy to the surrounding point. This type of operation was employed most effectively at Montélimar area, with the exception that the greater blocking strength could have been profitably used as the blocking force was stretched so thinly it could not prevent entirely the infiltration escape of numerous enemies, probably the ones that shot my grandfather in the wrist. Direct pursuit by smaller units is more difficult of execution because it devolves to a foot race sort of operation. The undesirable aspects of this sort of pursuit lie in the face that small units do not have room in which to apply entrapment tactics because of being restricted to limited routes of advance. This results in local time-consuming attacks on roadblocks and delaying positions. Such positions are generally knocked out with no particular difficulty, other than the time lost in getting started again as the obstacle is cleared. This time is lost because every organization requires a certain amount of readjustment prior to resuming the advance after being engaged. Large-scale plans should be made for the destruction or protection of bridges. Frequently, troops that could be more profitably used elsewhere were used to guard the bridges of doubtful future value, whereas the destruction of the bridge would have freed troops for offensive action. Essential bridges must be seized and protected, and a certain number of secondary bridges should be left also, but many minor bridges could be demolished and therefore release troops while at the same time make flanks more secure. Number 3, equipment used during this operation is undergoing tremendous strain. Trucks have traveled as high as 5,000 miles in 2 weeks. This, combined with battle losses and almost no replacement, concerns one because we must prevent a large-scale breakdown of transportation if we expect to continue at the present pace. Of course, this is a calculated risk that must be taken, but one that must not be overlooked. The same thoughts apply to armor and to a lesser degree to other equipment. Paul D. Adams, Colonel, 143rd Infantry, commanding. Oh my goodness. And the list of commanders: Paul D. Adams, Colonel, 143rd Infantry, commanding. David M. Frazier, Lieutenant Colonel, 143rd Infantry, commanding 1st Battalion. Golden M. Watkins, Lieutenant Colonel, 143rd Infantry, commanding 2nd Battalion. So, Theodore H. Andrews, Major, 143rd Infantry, commanding the 3rd Battalion, or my grandfather. Very, very interesting. They actually got a presidential citation for this whole thing. And so, as written, the period covered by this report includes 1 month of active pursuit of the enemy from the vicinity of Lyon, France, to Douchiels, France. The action was characterized by a continual improvement of German organization, supply, and communication, which enabled the Germans to better their delaying tactics from day to day. These aspects, combined with the diminishing effectiveness of the Marquis and the French forces of the interior, forced upon regimental and battalion commanders slower methods than been employed when the Germans were disorganized and the French forces of the interior well organized and helpful. The slower methods spoken of here constituted many foot marches, as opposed to making motorized and mechanized marches, more careful reconnaissance and patrolling, more careful planning of the many minor attacks necessitated by enemy delaying forces and roadblocks, and allowance for fatigue being experienced by the officers and men alike. During a pursuit, there will be invariably come a time, unless the enemy is entirely defeated, when he can establish blocks, delays, defenses, and effect counter-attacks, which, if not properly anticipated and well prepared for, may cause the pursuer a considerable number of setbacks. While action must be continued, objectives should be shorter, units must get closer together, and the general strength of the pursuer must gradually be collected so that when the stronger resistances appear, the pursuer has the force at hand to deal with them. The necessity of recognizing signs of improvement in the enemy's situation is most important and must be known to all commanders. This was most forcefully demonstrated during the crossing of the Moselle River. The Germans had attempted to hold the Moselle River line and were moving in that line in such formations so they can gather up. Our crossing was made under the coloring of the continued pursuit as opposed to establishing a firm bridgehead. Our objective were widely separated and difficult to reach even without opposition. Our engineer support was not gauged on a river crossing. In other words, we were using pursuit tactics, but encountering the strongest resistance we had met since Montélimar. Because of our widespread formation, the Germans were able to counter us with a relatively light strength, but at the same time proven a rapid establishment of a bridgehead. The enemy was able to do this because our strength was scattered and we were unable to strike back with sufficient force and throw him back, although we had numerically and materially superior forces in the area. Having once located our crossing, the enemy, because of our dispersion, was able to harass us all the more. And what is more important, he was able to slow us down, increase his material defenses, and concentrate near our crossing such strength as he was available to him. All of concentrate near our crossing such strength as he had available to him. I reread that again, sorry. All of which combined with favorable terrain available to the enemy allowed the Germans to succeed in their desires to delay us for an extended period of time. Future operations must be scheduled with some planned rest periods, wherein the officers and men are able to recuperate from the strain of combat. While little shooting occurred during many days of this pursuit, there was always present the possibility of immediate engagement, which places a strain on those in command. This mental strain of active fighting, or the constant anticipation of fighting, combined with the physical fatigue inherent to all operations, results eventually in a physical and mental lethargy, which is almost unbelievable until observed at close hand. The solution to this problem is having short rest periods of 2 or 3 days. On the 1 day of rest permitted this organization, I was able to observe a definite pickup in their morale. Such rests of 2 or 3 days duration, frequently interspersed in the fighting would, in my opinion, increase the overall efficiency of all organizations. In the long run, this policy would pay boundless dividends. Colonel of the 143rd Infantry commanding Paul D. Adams. Very, very interesting. Okay, so next, on September 1st of 1944, after my grandfather was shot in the wrist, the 143rd was in the vicinity of Valenciennes, France, southeast of Lyon or Lyon, France. The 1st Battalion was at Hero. The 2nd Battalion was at La Falouse. The 3rd Battalion at Chafonday, each patrolling actively in its sector. 4 officer-led patrols were ordered to operate in the 143rd RCT sector with the mission of seeking the presence of enemy in the area, the presence of mines in the area, and the location of German installations, strong points, and anti-tank obstacles. Roadblocks were set up at the road junction, each of Heru. Okay, wow, this is really interesting because now they get into an attack on September 1st at 0700, 1944. The 143rd actually continued the advance on my plane, Genasse line. The enemy was retreating to the north and northeast. His forces were composed, as far as could be determined, of remnants of the German 19th Army, numbering approximately 23,000 men, several batteries of artillery, an unknown number of tanks and self-propelled mounts. The size of this force increased as its retreat northward picked up other enemy retreating units. During the period from September 1 to the 8th of September of 1944, the enemy resorted to delaying actions to hinder our advance, making no more contact than what was forced upon them. The 143rd RCT made contact with stragglers or with scattered delaying grow varying in size from 20 to 30 to several hundred men placed at advantageous defensive positions. He established roadblocks, especially at main road junctions. When time permitted, he resorted to the demolition of bridges, particularly at unfordable streams. When closely pursued, he used artillery, self-propelled mounts, small arms, and sniper fire to delay the 143rd RCT advance. I'm not going to read on, but so what I found out was my grandfather, who I'll show you in a moment, who was in this battle right here that we're seeing, that you've been seeing this whole time, of San Pietro, the Rapido River, Anzio, Italy. He was in Africa, the Africa Corps, basically seizing France and liberating it, then moving on and marching on into Germany. Their unit received the Presidential Citation Award, which is quite interesting, for the capturing of this mount, this ridge, which my grandfather was actually shot in the wrist over. They received, I think, 5 presidential citations. And my grandfather lives on in the memory of this YouTube video, and in the memory of my mind. Although I did not meet him, I could picture how brave he was. He never got a break, as it said in the commanding officer's report. They did not give them much of a break. They were fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting, battle weary. They saw their friends and buddies blown up. They saw the horrors of hell, came back to the U.S., and most of them got a hero's welcome, but most of them didn't, like my grandfather. He ended up living in a tiny little apartment in Queens, New York, moving from Brooklyn, New York. And he ended up surrounding himself with books, working at a ribbon factory as a ribbon cutter for hats, women's hats, and then died in 1970, a disabled vet with PTSD, with a damaged right hand that was shot right through his wrist. And nobody remembered him except for me and my daughter. So thanks for watching. And these men really went through the horrors of hell. And people back home did not realize that these men saw bloody battles, shot and killed the enemy, saw their friends shot and killed and blown up. And they were expected to be normal people, not filled with rage or anger or having terrible, horrible nightmares, screaming out in their sleep. Most turned to alcohol for relief. There is no cure, and there's still no cure for PTSD. There is no magic medicine that can make the flashbacks stop and the horrors go away of these burned out villages that actually play over and over in your mind, with dead bodies scattered, laying across the ground, and dead animals, dead people, civilians, dead children, rounds blowing up, tanks blowing things up, mortars blowing things up, explosions, casualties being marched off on stretchers. And you come home and people are expected you to just move on, Johnny. Move on, Peter. Like my grandfather, move on and get to work at the factory of the ribbon cutting factory and make bows and ribbons for women's hats so they can look fashionable, while all their buddies were being buried as they cut into the ground with their shovels and were thrown into holes, and they had to say goodbye right there on the battlefield. Very sad. Thanks for watching. See you guys all soon, and so long.